Hello, my dear friend. Welcome back to the Reflective Parenting Podcast. My name is Cindy Hovington and I am your host. Today's conversation is one I think that every parent needs to hear because we're talking about your nervous system and why it's important to understand it, because this will help you understand your emotions as well as your child's emotions and your reactions. So many parents come to me saying that they want to stop reacting to their child's behaviors and emotions. They want to start responding. And so, if you truly do want to start doing this, then you need to start understanding your nervous system as well as your child's. If you are new here to Curious Neuron, welcome. That is the company that I founded. And here at this podcast, the Reflective Parenting Podcast, I'm trying to bring you the research and the experts that are going to help you learn more about yourself. This is not your typical parenting podcast. I'm not going to share all the behavioral changes that we can have in our kids. We're going to work our way towards that by first learning how to take care of ourselves. I am that person that's going to say, you can do this. I'm that person that's going to say, it's okay that you messed up today in whichever way you think you messed up. And yelling at our kids is one of those ways. And I really wanted to bring my guest today on the podcast. First of all, I've had her before. I highly, highly recommend her work and her new book, which we will share in the episode. But more importantly, she's an expert in understanding the nervous system. And a lot of the parents that I work with, either privately or through the Reflective Parent Club in a group, the beginning journey for them in learning to become a reflective parent is that building that self-awareness around their own nervous system, something which many of us never learned growing up. And so it's really important for us to build that skill, which it is a skill, if we want to stop reacting to our kids. Before I begin, I just want to share not share, but thank the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute as well as the McConnell Foundation. It is thanks to these two organizations that believe in the importance of sharing science with the general public that this podcast still exists. And so if you, my dear friends, are listening to this podcast and you have not rated the podcast at least on 5 stars, which takes 3 seconds. You can do that, I believe, both on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Or if you haven't added a little extra love by leaving a review, for the podcast, please take a moment to do that, because these are the kinds of things that will allow us to continue the podcast. More importantly, today's episode is so important that I've decided to break it down into 2 weeks. We're going to have part 1 today and part 2 next week. And as you're going to hear at the end of this episode, I'm going to share a reflection prompt for you, because many of you have been emailing me, which you can, by the way, at info@curiousneuron.com, telling me that you enjoy the reflection prompts. That's why, by the way, I built the Reflective Parent Club. This is a program that I've built based on teaching you how to reflect on your own. I want this to become something you're able to do. And many parents that join say, I've been listening to the podcast for a year or two, but I don't know how to apply the things that I'm hearing, or I have self-awareness now, but I'm not seeing the changes. That's because you need a little bit extra support and you need to practice these skills in your home, which is why I meet with you every single week inside the Reflective Parent Club. So you can learn more about that club by clicking the link in the show notes. And I'm a little bit delayed in pulling out the course that we have and turning it into its own thing. It's still integrated into the program, so you get 2 for 1. You get both the course and the weekly calls. If that's what's interesting to you, then you might as well get it now, because I'm a week or even maybe 2 weeks delayed with that. All that being said, you will have part 1 today and part 2 next Monday. So stay tuned if this is a topic you want to learn about. So my guest today is pediatric occupational therapist Laura Petix. She's also known as the OT Butterfly. Laura helps parents and kids understand the connection between sensory needs, emotion regulation, and behavior, especially for neurodivergent children and parents. She reminds us that behaviors are reflections of the nervous system, not the problem itself. In this first part of our 2-part series, we'll explore what's really happening beneath meltdowns and big emotions for your child, and how both parents and kids can start tuning into what their bodies are trying to communicate. And there's a science behind this, by the way. Research shows that people who are more aware of what's happening inside their body, a skill called interoception, are actually better at identifying and regulating their emotions. So I've written a full blog post to accompany this podcast episode. In case that is easier for you to share, you can click the link in the show notes. The blog post is there. In the show notes, there's also a link to our podcast Facebook page if you want to join the conversation there. And as you'll hear at the end of this episode, there's also a speak pipe. It's a 1 minute audio that you can leave if you want to share with us based on the reflection I'll leave at the end. I'm just trying to find ways to get you to engage a little bit more with this podcast, because it brings me pleasure to hear who's there on the other side of this mic that I'm speaking to in my basement. And so I'm trying to find ways to engage all of you and have a conversation with you. So there was a study that I wanted to share with you. It's in the Journal of Affective Disorders by Zamoriola and colleagues in 2019. And researchers found that people with low interoception struggle to describe and manage emotions and often use less healthy coping strategies. And so if we're resorting to scrolling when we're bored or sad or mad at somebody, when we walk away from an argument rather than sitting down and really dealing with the emotion that's coming with that conflict, these are all signs that we might not be able to tell what's going on inside our body and then react or respond appropriately, right? If we are always yelling at people around us or even our kids, well, it's not that you go from 0 to 100. Something is happening before that that you might not be connected or attuned to yet. And so this study showed that that skill is really important to help us cope with emotions in a healthy way. And those that had high interoception, in fact, felt more confident, used mindfulness and movement, and recovered more easily after stressful events. And so, what we're going to do in today's episode is talk about the first part, which is just understanding your sensory needs for you and your child. Next week's episode, we're going to deal or dive into interoception a lot more. And inside the Reflective Parent Club, we're going to explore what this looks like in our home, in our lives, a lot more. And so, if you're like, "Oh, I relate to this. I actually don't know what my sensory needs are," then come join us. Grab your free week and come join the weekly call. It's on Tuesdays at 12 p.m. and 8 p.m. You join when it's most appropriate to you, and that's Eastern time. All right, I don't want to delay you anymore. Let's dive into my conversation with Laura Petix. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflective Parenting Podcast, which was formerly called the Curious Neuron Podcast. And as promised, I'm here with Laura Petix. Laura, welcome back to the Curious Neuron. Oh, I said it to the Reflective Parenting Podcast. Welcome back.
Still getting used to it. Hello, Cindy. It's so good to be back with you. I always love our conversations.
I do as well. And I love keeping in touch with you and following you and your work. And congratulations on this book. For those of you watching on YouTube, I'm just going to show this. But I'm so excited for you. A kid's book about neurodiversity. It is so needed. And I think it was within a week or two of having this in my hands, I was on a Facebook group and somebody said, "Are there any books out there for parents who have kids who are that are neurodiverse? I can't find anything." And I was like, "Hold on a second." And I posted your book and I was like, "Here," and I trust her and I know her and you need to get this book. And so it shows that it's needed out there. So congrats on that. What led to, well, I have a feeling, but I want to know the story. Like, how did this come about?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for that sweet message. And the endorsement always means so much coming from you. Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know me, I am a pediatric occupational therapist. So, my clinical work has been supporting families with neurodivergent children. And I am also neurodivergent, and I have a daughter who is neurodivergent. So, this is just very part of my world. Everywhere I look, every fiber of my being, this is just literally what I think and do and talk about every single day. And what I realized was when I was coaching parents, talking them through some of the behaviors that they were seeing at home and trying to support their kid at school, the same theme would come up where we would kind of have a stopping point where maybe their child or student wasn't willing to sort of like follow through with some of the strategies, or they were having really low self-esteem and having a hard time making friends. And a lot of the thing that I kept asking them, do they know about neurodiversity? Do they know their brain works differently? And most of the answers were, ranged from, well, we're not sure they're neurodivergent yet, to we do know, but we haven't told them. We don't know if it's
Right.
the right time.
Mm.
I don't want to, cause something that they kind of don't really know about right now. And over time, I just realized one of the first steps to helping kids, neurodivergent kids, thrive is helping inform them about the way that their brain works. But even more than that, when I realized that work, just telling their parents to talk to their kids about it, um, is the importance of taking this burden off of neurodivergent families, the burden of having to always explain
Right.
behaviors of our children out in public, or
Mm.
in the school, or our kids having to explain their behaviors to their friends. Because what if we just lived in a world or in our community where the people around us just knew to expect different ways to play, different ways to communicate, different ways to learn? And so after so many times of basically giving parents the script of how to talk to kids about neurodiversity, because they're like, well, how do I tell the sibling? How do
Mhm.
I tell the neighbor if it's not just my child, but they're so I came up with this like talking point script that I kept saying over and over. And I was like, I feel like this could just be a book. And
Mm.
then I came across a kids co, and they make so many wonderful topics all for kids. And so I pitched myself to them, and they accepted, and that's how it started. And so this is definitely a personal, professional merging
Mm.
of my worlds.
When I think of somebody explaining the neurodivergent brain, I think of you. You've done it
Oh,
so well for so
thank
long,
you.
and I appreciate the work that you put out there. I think of the families that you mentioned. I've met with some families who have a child who just received a diagnosis, and there's this period of uncertainty. We just received it. I've heard from parents who say, like, I don't believe it. We're not going to accept it. We're going to go look for another doctor that might take another test. And I hear so many people talk about how hard that period is. But then on the other end, I've heard some people say, like, that helps us understand our child more. What do you say to a parent who is in the boat of, I don't accept this. I'm not going to tell my child. I don't want this label. How can we start that conversation with them to open that up?
Yeah. I always start with parents like I do with kids. I completely see where you're coming from. I know
Mm.
why it feels scary to hear this about your child, because if you think about what you think you know about that
Right.
diagnosis,
Mm.
I'm sure you're picturing a child from your fourth grade class or that
Mm.
movie or what you heard in the headlines
Mhm.
and whatever you grew up with as your example. And parents our age did not grow up with seeing so much of a variety
It's true.
in functions and support needs. And so we might hear someone who is new to this world might hear autism and
Mhm.
be thinking of one specific person from their life that they
Yeah.
knew was autistic.
Mhm.
And likely back then, if we're talking about parents growing up in the 80s and 90s, kids who were diagnosed as autistic back then were probably more in the high needs range than what we
Right.
see today.
Mm.
Right. So I validate that and know where it comes from. And then I explore, I say that today, how certain diagnoses change and the diagnostic criteria change. And I kind of give a little bit of education behind that. And so we kind of are casting a wider net so it looks
Mm.
a lot different. And then I also gently kind of explore the other options, not options, but I kind of explore what life is like now. Because I
Mm.
hear parents say, I don't want my child to feel different.
Right.
I don't want them to feel different if I tell
Mm.
them about the diagnosis. And then I gently say, well, do you think that they feel different now? Do you think that they
Mm.
notice that they feel different now? Usually their answer is, I don't know. Or, well, they do mention that, kids aren't inviting them to their birthday or the teacher's
Mhm.
always having them sit on that part of
Mm.
the room. When you explore it more, it's okay, you don't want them to feel different. They are already feeling different, I'm pretty sure, right? And
Yeah.
or are being treated differently already. Same goes for labels. I don't want to label them. what I find from talking to adults who are late identified for neurodivergence, um, and myself included, as we think back to our childhood and think of all the labels that were placed onto us
Mm.
anyway. And
Mhm.
they were not the kindest labels. It was lazy, it was
Mhm.
troublemaker, it was crybaby, it was all
Mhm.
of these other labels when it really was ADHD or
Mhm.
autism or
Mhm.
anxiety. And
Yeah.
so I understand the scariness of something sounding so clinical,
Yeah.
and how that is colored by our past and our experience of what we think we know about it. But I really, really encourage parents to push past that and really think about how the lack of this identity and the lack of a name for something affects their child right now. Um,
Mm.
One example I share that I actually am writing in my new book that's coming out
Ooh.
the fall of 2026, I
Mhm.
believe. Um, One of the examples I share is that so I have, you can't really tell. I kind of have like my hair's a little, the curls are coming out right now, but this is a little bit straightened.
Mm.
In Up until college, mid like when I graduated college, I straightened my hair every single day. Hot iron, flat iron, chemicals. I chemically straightened it. I bought every single smoothing cream out there because I hated my hair. It was
Mm.
frizzy, it was
Mm.
coarse, and it just would never go how I wanted it to go. It was not straight enough, and it was so ugly. Like I would
Mm.
call it ugly, fried,
Mm.
hated it. Straightened it every single day, like you could until you could smell that it was straight. Like you could smell when my hair was straight. People here who straighten their hair know what that is. And um one day I was getting ready with my friend and I was curling my hair actually. I used to have to blow dry, straighten, and then curl my hair. That's how much
Mm.
I was doing it to my hair. My friend said, "Oh my gosh, your hair holds a curl so well. You don't even have to put hairspray. Your natural hair must be so pretty." And I was like, "Excuse you, what are you talking about? My natural hair is frizzy and ugly and
Mm.
fried and all of this stuff, all of these other labels."
Mhm.
And then until I did some research and I was like, turns out I have 2B curly hair. For people who follow curly hair trends, there's like certain categories and profiles.
Oh my gosh.
And my entire life, so then once I knew my hair was curly,
Mm.
I got curly shampoo. I got curly mousse. I learned the frequency that it's best to wash and not wash your curly hair. And my hair got healthier. I started loving my hair. I had curly hair. I didn't have ugly, not straight enough, straight,
Right.
frizzy, fried hair.
Mm.
Right. So this example really shows us
Mm.
that through if you are forcing or really really trying to see your child under one lens and really really want them to be a certain label and not something else,
Mm.
even though you have good intentions, it might be doing a little bit more harm than good in
Mm.
the long run, right? Like for me specifically, my hair was fried, but in terms of the labels that your child puts onto themselves or that they get from other kids, sometimes having more uh, context to certain behavior leads to more compassion from others rather than judgment, even though
Right.
that's the first thing that parents think about.
Yeah, it is. And I think it comes from a good place of wanting to keep your child safe. But you've explained it so well in the sense that there will be labels. Somebody will call them out, will call them a name. They will feel, they might feel
Right.
different in certain situations. And so why not have the context like you talked about in your hair? I do this differently. And I think that's what your book does so well. It allows us to have the words because I think some parents might not even have or feel like they don't have the right words, right? Like, how do I tell this to my child? Would you
Yeah.
recommend that if we're kind of confused and not sure how to introduce this and the new diagnosis to our child, to kind of just use the book as a guide?
The book is a really great conversation starter, no matter where you're at in your journey, whether you know
Mm.
there's a diagnosis or not, because it doesn't talk about diagnoses
No.
specifically. It just
Right.
talks about neurodiversity in general. So if you are someone who knows your child's autistic, but you're not ready to say that,
Hmm.
but you want to have the conversation, this can be helpful. This might lead to questions that
Right.
you would rather have them ask you than someone else, or hear
Exactly.
something somewhere else and fill in the gaps with misinformation, right? So
Mm.
this is definitely a great starting point for those parents.
Right. And I love that there's a part of your book that you kind of ask the person reading, like to ask the other person questions, right? Like you're trying to
Yeah.
start these conversations. And I love that because that's how we explore, like, oh yeah, I do that differently. We don't all do that differently. We don't all do it the same way. And it's okay that we do it that way. And it's so great I think I've seen in your stories that you were reading this in schools or a school, but like, I wish every school would have this as like an afternoon or like taking time to read this together so that we can learn about each other.
Yeah, my
Mm.
dream is to have all schools to do introduce neurodiversity in the first week, if not
Yeah.
month
Yeah.
of the school year, to already get ahead of the narrative, already call out accommodations you might see in the classrooms, kids having to go in and out for different tutoring,
Hmm.
different therapies, just calling it out there rather than expecting them not to notice, or expecting them to notice and then also expecting them to be nice and kind about it if they
Yeah.
have no context, right? So
Right.
this is
Exactly.
just something that needs to be called out
Yeah.
and normalized for
Right.
kids.
Right. I just realized that I usually start off the conversation by making sure we're all on the same page. If a parent hasn't heard about neurodiversity, what is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. This is a perfect starting point
Yeah.
because this is part of what we talk about in the book.
Hmm.
So, neurodiversity is this idea that every single brain is different from one another, right? Neuro comes from neurons, which are the wires in your brain, and it sends signals from your brain to the rest of your body and back and forth. That's how it communicates with the rest of your body. So that's the neuro part. And diversity just means differences.
Hmm.
So we see the human population as neurodiverse as a group. A group of
Right.
people is called neurodiverse because everybody has a different brain. It's kind of like a fingerprint. Everyone has a unique brain. But even within the neurodiverse population of the human species, there are subcategories of neurotypes.
Hmm.
So the kinds of brains, and they can have some more similarities of brain patterns between each other. So that's when we see a neurotype of ADHD
Hmm.
or autism. But the more umbrella term between autism and ADHD is neurodivergent.
Right.
So, neurodivergent is someone who diverges even more uniquely from the majority of the population. And the other, like, sort of main, more common neurotype that functions more easier in the world with its default settings
Mm.
is someone who we call neurotypical. I want to stress to parents, though, that there is no such thing as a neurotypical, like one neurotypical brain, like a textbook
Mm.
brain, one example of a healthy brain. This is what we want to strive to. It's not
Right.
about the brain itself, it's
Mm.
about how that person is able to feel comfortable and succeed and function in their daily life in its default state. So they don't need accommodations, they don't need to adjust certain things. They are pretty successful and functional, and it has no impact on their mental health. A
Right.
neurodivergent person will depend on accommodations, sensory supports, extra regulation tools in
Mm.
order to function and feel comfortable in their daily life. And without it, we see mental health challenges, physical
Right.
challenges, a lot of stress, and effects on the nervous system.
Can we actually dig deeper into that? And in terms
Yeah.
of the sensory issues and even the regulation tools, I think that that's some of the bigger struggles that you hear from parents who have, a child who has ADHD or is autistic. They struggle with that piece. Can you share a little bit more about what that looks like?
Yeah. So whether or not, so I will always start out by saying every person has sensory preferences. There are
Right. Yes.
sensory
Mm.
things that we like, that we want more of, things that
Mm-hmm.
we really hate, a taste of something. Some people hate roller coasters. Every single person has sensory triggers and sensory
Mm.
things that they like, right? Not
Mm.
everybody is as functionally impacted in their
Right.
day when those sensory needs are not appropriately met.
Right.
Now, when I say appropriately met, there are so many different sensory profiles, and there can be a combination of a few for each person. But some of the main kind of profiles that we think of are some kids who are sensory avoidant or sensory sensitive. So they can't really tolerate a lot of movement or touch on their skin. They might
Mm,
be sensitive to clothing. They might have really, really big emotional reactions as a function of feeling uncomfortable
mm,
from the sensory trigger. And then there's also kids who are sensory seekers who they need a lot more movement or touch or even sound or bold taste
mm,
in order to feel grounded and regulated in their body. And so both of those are examples of sensory needs. So someone might have a need to have less sound in their day to feel comfortable, and someone might have a need to have more movement in their day to be comfortable.
right.
And there can certainly be a combination where someone has sensory sensitivities to
Mm,
sound, let's say, and then they are seeking to like touch and cuddling and squeezes and jumping. That's
right.
something that's very common.
And so there are differences between children just within what you said, right? So it's not a diagnosis, it's not it's just in terms of us noticing whether they are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so sensory processing differences. Some people say sensory processing disorder.
Mm,
Um, I prefer to use neurodiversity affirming language, so I
right.
say SPD, and I mean sensory processing differences. But it's not a standalone clinical diagnosis. But there are populations, like clinical populations, with more significant sensory needs than others who
Right.
also don't qualify for autism or ADHD. So there's
Oh,
a
right.
subset of
Mm,
the population, and they've actually studied their brain. So they can see differences in the white matter of the brain
hmm,
in kids who who have significant sensory needs but don't have a DSM diagnosis. So we
right.
know that there is a population that has very significant sensory needs in general, even without other diagnoses. But sensory needs can also fall under autism and also be part of the ADHD picture, as well as anxiety. And like I said, even without those diagnoses.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's so important for us to know the basics of that because I think sometimes like we just see the behavior output, right? We see the child who's acting out, the child who's yelling at nighttime or, getting dressed in the morning and refuses. And so we only see the behavior piece. And it's so important for us to realize that there might be so many other underlying reasons, including these sensory needs.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. The debate of is it sensory or is it behavior is one that I always want to debunk, because I just always say behavior is a reflection of the nervous system, and we just want to
Mhm.
know what it is that the nervous system really needs right now. Sometimes it is a sensory need, sometimes
Mhm.
it's not, but all behavior, it's all a behavior.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
parents or teachers are just wondering, are they doing it on purpose,
Yeah, I know.
or is it something they can't help? And even then I can go further and say, well,
Mm.
what if they are doing it on purpose to have a need met?
Mhm.
Right? So it's
Mhm.
still, I still challenge that, oh, it's just behavioral kind of
Mhm. That's such a good
thought
question.
process,
Yeah,
right?
I
Yeah.
love that question. I really do think that even as parents, not just as educators, but we should be asking ourselves that question
Yeah.
to help us dig deeper because in the moment when we're triggered and we're upset, we just see the
Yeah.
behavior and we're not going to ask ourselves questions. It's just like,
No.
I need to stop this now.
Yeah, of
And it's
course.
hard.
Of course. And it's
Yeah.
easy to take things personally and be like,
Mhm.
oh, they're just doing this to make me upset.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
testing my
Yeah.
boundaries. They're doing
Mhm.
this. But okay, why?
Mhm.
Why do you think they're doing that? And it's tough to be in that seat of being asked these
Right.
questions,
Yeah.
because you know you might not like the
No.
answer, but it's that's the work that has to be done.
Yeah, it's true. All right, that was the end of part one. I hope that you learned a lot from this episode in terms of understanding your nervous system and your child's. I often hear from parents, especially moms, that feel so guilty that they're constantly yelling at their child, yet they're not aware of how much they are putting onto their nervous system during the day. This happens to dads as well, to all of us. And what happens is that we're not kind of attuned with all the conversations we are having that are dysregulating us or parts of our past that still linger in our nervous system. Sensory. needs that we have that we just continue to ignore throughout the day. Some of us get stimulated by sight. And so things that are around our home, messy homes, dysregulate us. Some of us are dysregulated by sound. And so if we've been around noisy kids or we work in a daycare or school, obviously we are going to be dysregulated when we get home. We have to become a little bit more connected to ourselves and our nervous system. And so in the show notes, I've put a link to Facebook where I put a question. So the question I want you to ask yourself, or the activity also that I would like you to do this week, is what is one thing you can do every day to protect your nervous system? I know that that word every day might feel overwhelming, but it's truly something small. On your way back from work, as you are going home, is there music that you can play that is soothing to your nervous system, that boosts your energy perhaps? Is there a way that you can take a 5 or 10 minute walk when you get home, if you're not with the kids yet, or before leaving the office to be a little bit late, 5 to 10 minutes later, that will allow you to connect with yourself, something that will allow you to take care of your nervous system. So you can let me know what you're going to do by clicking the link and telling me about this on the Facebook page, or you can also click the speak pipe link and leave a 1 minute audio. Maybe you have a question, and after listening to this episode, you are struggling with something and you want an answer to this. I will answer it next week, but you have to leave an audio so that I can hear it, and I'll post the audio. You don't even need to say your name. Just tell me what your question is. Or you can share the answer to this question. What is the one thing you are going to do every day to protect your nervous system this week? All right, that is it for today, my dear friends. I will see you next week, and I hope you enjoy that this episode has been broken down into 2 parts. Let me know. Send me an email at info@kirstnon.com, and I will see you next Monday. Have a wonderful week, everyone. Bye.